Max Verstappen didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because what he said after day 2 of preseason testing was more than a critique. It was a warning. A warning that Formula One, as we know it, may be heading down a dangerous path. One where the cars don't just feel different. They behave differently. And if you think this is just another complaint from a dominant driver, keep watching. Because the problem Verstappen described might not be fixable before the 2026 season begins. Barcelona, January 27th. The second day of Formula One's preseason testing was supposed to be just that, a second day. Refinements, tire data, engine mapping, the kind of work that doesn't usually make headlines. But from the moment the track went green, it became clear this wasn't going to be a normal session. Red Bull had Verstappen scheduled for the afternoon. Before that, it was Isaac Hadjar's turn, the rookie reserve, running aero maps in the new RB22. And although he wasn't pushing for lap times, the tension was already in the air. The team wasn't looking for performance, they were looking for signs of stability. They didn't find them. Hadjar lost the rear in turn 14. Fast entry, mid-corner instability, and then, just like that, he was in the wall. The crash wasn't enormous, but the timing was. Less than 24 hours after Max had already warned about unpredictability with the new aero systems. Now, Red Bull's brand new car, the most anticipated machine of the 2026 transition, was sitting in the gravel. But things escalated again in the afternoon. Verstappen went out for a short run. The track was cold, the grip was marginal, but Max didn't wait. He immediately started pushing, even brushing the gravel at turn 5 on just his second lap. And yet, despite everything, he delivered the fastest time of the entire day. A 1 minute and 19.5 seconds, more than a second faster than anyone else, on a circuit that wasn't even close to optimal conditions. Still, that lap didn't reassure people. Because Red Bull wasn't celebrating. And Verstappen wasn't smiling. When he stepped out of the car and spoke to the media, the message was simple and unsettling. When Verstappen took off his helmet after that short afternoon run, the first thing the media noticed wasn't his lap time. It was his face. Not angry, not frustrated, but concerned. And the words that followed confirmed it. "I think it's very difficult," he said. He wasn't talking about setup, or traffic, or weather. He was talking about the car, the entire 2026 concept, and how it feels behind the wheel. According to Max, the new generation machines are very hard to drive, especially at high speeds. He described the behavior as unpredictable, weird, and potentially unsafe at the limit. And that's not the kind of language you expect from a 4-time world champion. Verstappen isn't known for overreacting. If anything, he underplays problems, prefers to handle things internally. So when he chooses to speak publicly, and with that tone, it's deliberate. He wasn't just giving feedback. He was sending a message. And that message was aimed at the FIA. Because according to Max, the energy deployment rules for 2026 are broken. He said, and this is almost word for word, if the FIA doesn't change it, it's going to be very tough. At Monza, we'll have to lift 500 meters before the corner to recharge the battery. That's not racing. That sentence, quietly delivered, hit like a bomb across the paddock. It wasn't just a critique of one regulation. It was a direct challenge to the entire vision of what Formula One is becoming. And the timing? Couldn't be worse. Because just hours earlier, Hadjar had lost control in a corner that should have been routine. And now Verstappen, the best driver on the grid, was saying, "This isn't a one-off. This is baked into the car." Red Bull didn't just build a fast car for 2026. They built a weapon, aggressive in packaging, bold in philosophy, and surgically optimized around Verstappen's feedback. But the car isn't the issue. The issue is the rulebook. Starting in 2026, Formula One enters what the FIA has called the energy efficiency era. That means smaller fuel loads, more restrictive battery usage, and, most controversial of all, mandatory deployment protocols. In plain English, drivers can't just decide how they use the battery anymore. Every lap, every straight, every corner is governed by a software algorithm, not the driver's instinct. And for a team like Red Bull, that's a nightmare. Because Red Bull's core philosophy, from Newey down to the race engineers, is driver-led. They build cars that come alive in the hands of someone like Verstappen, sensitive on throttle, reactive on entry, adjustable mid-corner. But if the FIA is now enforcing energy conservation patterns, hard-coded by regulation, it takes that flexibility away. It removes the margin for creativity. The irony is brutal. Red Bull has built what might be the most aerodynamically efficient chassis on the grid. They've designed ultra-tight cooling, custom dampers, and a low-drag floor. But none of that matters if the car isn't allowed to use power when the driver needs it. You can't attack if you're lifting 500 meters before the corner. You can't defend if the deployment window is already spent halfway down the straight. And the data they're collecting in Barcelona? It's not making things easier. It's confirming Verstappen's fears. Because when you run simulations in a wind tunnel, the system looks fine. But when you put a human behind the wheel, with changing grip levels and tire evolution, that's where the rigidity of the rules becomes a real liability. And Red Bull is discovering that the hard way. Let's take a step back. Because while all eyes are on Verstappen, on Hadjar, on the lap times and telemetry, very few are asking the real question. Why did the FIA let this rule structure go forward in the first place? Inside the paddock, some engineers are already whispering the answer. They say this regulation, the aggressive energy deployment restriction, was rushed. That it was meant to level the playing field, especially for manufacturers coming into 2026 with new power units. And on paper, that sounds fair. Until you realize what it actually does. It punishes efficiency. Teams like Red Bull, who've spent years perfecting ultra-low drag concepts and tight energy recovery loops, are now boxed in. Because if you're fast, but the rules tell you to coast, then all your aerodynamic work becomes meaningless. And worse, it benefits teams who were behind. Those who didn't build for maximum efficiency are suddenly back in the game. Because now, everyone has to lift early, conserve, and limit energy use. And this isn't a theory. It's a pattern. The same kind of regulatory blind spot that once allowed Mercedes' DAS system to slip through undetected, or Ferrari's secret engine deal in 2019 to go unpunished, is now showing up again, but in reverse. This time, it's not about someone finding a loophole. It's about a system so tightly sealed, it doesn't allow the best teams to perform at their limit. And here's the part that should concern everyone, not just Red Bull fans. The FIA isn't commenting on Verstappen's criticisms. Not publicly. Not yet. But behind the scenes, they're collecting data. From every car, every team, every deployment pattern. Which means, they're already preparing a response. But the question is, will that response be a correction? Or a cover-up? If Verstappen is right, and if the 2026 regulations really do compromise racing, then the impact won't be isolated to Red Bull. It will shift the entire grid. And teams are already starting to adjust. Mercedes, for example, has been surprisingly quiet during these test sessions. They haven't shown pace. They haven't revealed anything radical. But if these deployment restrictions remain unchanged, a team like Mercedes, historically more conservative in chassis philosophy, could suddenly find themselves in a more competitive window. Ferrari, too, is in a strange position. They've taken risks with the SF26, aggressive sidepod channels, tight floor packaging, and a front end that's clearly more responsive than last year. But if they can't deploy power when needed, all of that aero development might be neutralized. And behind the scenes, you can feel it. They're not sure if they've gone too far, or not far enough. And then there's Aston Martin, and to some extent, McLaren. Both have built 2026 cars that are less extreme. Not slow, but cautious. And ironically, that might work in their favor now. Because if the rules reduce the reward for taking risks, the midfield, by default, closes the gap. This isn't balance through development. It's balance by restriction. And at the center of it all, is the FIA. They're under pressure now, more than they expected. Because if these concerns grow louder, if more drivers start echoing Verstappen, they'll be forced to respond before the first race. But any mid-season or pre-season change could create chaos. And teams like Red Bull, who've optimized everything around a strict interpretation of the rules, would be the ones most disrupted. So the next move? It's political. Do the FIA hold firm and force teams to adapt? Or do they admit that the system needs tweaking before it breaks under real race conditions? What Verstappen said in that press line, calmly, almost coldly, is now echoing through every technical meeting in the paddock. Because it wasn't just about his discomfort with the new rules, it was a forecast. A warning that the 2026 season might not be shaped by racing excellence, but by a regulation no one wants to admit is flawed. And if you listen closely, you'll notice something strange. Other drivers are beginning to speak more carefully. Teams are refusing to release full telemetry from their long runs. And more engineers are requesting private meetings with the FIA's technical delegation. It's as if everyone's preparing, not for a championship fight, but for a rules crisis. Because what happens if, during the first Grand Prix, we see 3 or 4 cars underperform, not from reliability, but because they're being forced to underdrive? What happens if races are decided not by who attacks best, but by who lifts the earliest? That's not racing. That's simulation. And if that's where Formula One is heading, then Verstappen's frustration may turn into something much bigger. Not just driver criticism, but political defiance. We're not there yet. But the foundations are shaking. The FIA has a choice to make. And the paddock is watching. Every lap. Every word. Every silence. Because if this doesn't change, and soon, then what happened in Barcelona this January might be remembered not as a technical issue, but as the moment the sport began to lose its edge. And if there's one thing Formula One can't afford, it's losing the trust of the very drivers who make it great.